What is the scariest noise you've ever heard? Story 1. In my early 20s, I worked at a nuclear power plant in the laundry department, and there was an alarm for a nuclear event while I was on shift. All non-essential personnel had to take shelter in the on-site bunker and wait. For hours, the speakers blared an alarm and notice inside and out of the complex. The notice was something akin to alert. Nuclear event in progress. Take your stations. Alert. Hours. Answer. I grew up near a nuclear plant, and they'd test the town air raid sirens that would be used in case of an emergency plant at noon every day. The siren was at the fire department and was also used when trucks were dispatched. I learned the hard way. There was a backup siren at the high school. I was walking to the track after practice, and a voice announcing, "This is a test," and jumped a mile. Never noticed the speaker on the telephone pole before. Story 2. I was shot at once, and the sound of a bullet passing close by is pretty distinctive, but I didn't realize what had happened until later, so I wasn't actually frightened by it. The most terrified I've been from a sound was when I was working graveyard security at an old army fort converted into a school. Part of the job was to walk through the buildings every hour or so and check the doors that are supposed to be locked. During one check, I stopped midway to use the bathroom, and while I was washing my hands, I heard a sound part way between a moan and roar. That was exactly the sound you'd expect. Some shambling, undead monstrosity to make, and it came from right outside the bathroom door. I stood there frozen in terror for a good 5 minutes, still holding a paper towel. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I turned the lights off to get accustomed to the dark, slowly opened the door, and sprinted for the exit. I didn't go in another building the rest of the night. 2 days later, I was back for a day shift on the weekend. I'd had some time to consider what had happened, so I went back to the same bathroom and flushed the toilet. A minute later, the old water pipes made the same noise. Again. I stood on the other side of the door for a couple of seconds, minutes, and finally decided to just rush on through the door. Turns out my partner had snuck in earlier in the night and set up an electric keyboard to play creepy music on loop. Story 3. That emergency alert sound when it takes over your TV. Even though 99% of the time for me it's just been tests, that sound terrifies me. Story 4. The roar of a tornado that was about 1/18 of a mile from me combined with the sound of the emergency sirens and the fierce winds full of all kinds of debris. Answer. I tell you what, that sound is almost calming when you've been inside a tornado and can compare the sounds. I live on the edge of Tornado Alley. I've been as close as you're saying, and in my basements it's horrible and the like, but not nerve-wracking. You expect the howling rain wind sirens. You expect the crackle of the Weather Channel coming in and out before silence and dark. Then I was inside an EF2, I cannot imagine, and EF5. There is the expected buildup of the above. Crackle, dark, crackle, silence, dark. But there comes another set of sounds when the tornado is approaching that was unfamiliar to my 23-year-old self and been through constant drills since childhood. It's that rush you hear when a big rig is coming up on your sedan on a 2-lane highway, but amplified by 1,000. And then there is a noise you can only place because of action movies, the sound of metal tearing apart and away from concrete. And then an earth-shattering thud, the rocks, the foundations of the house you're in, as in literally fell from the couch, thud. And then, shoot as fudge when your dog has decided that she's now going full exorcist and puking up in her crate behind you, but you're worried about your idiot cat that has decided that the house-moving thud is the signal to run up the stairs and into the main house, so you run after him to look outside in dark flash. Something is wrong, and you realize the 50-foot tree that was outside that glass door is missing, And all you can say at the top step, look outside, holding on to the fuzzy idiot is, "Oh my God." And you're not religious at all. Story 5. Woman howling in distress after her very young son had died due to a sudden and unexpected illness. Me and the nurses ran towards thinking someone had been seriously injured. We found her completely broken and took her somewhere for privacy until her brother could arrive. Answer: same. I'm a nurse. I was working in the ER when an 11-day-old baby was brought in. We were just told CPR in progress, so we got prepared. The baby arrived first. Mom was in an ambulance behind. It was obvious the child had been dead for some time, blood pooling and rigor mortis. But the ER doctor said we were going to work on him so the mom could say goodbye when she gets here, and felt like we'd done everything possible to try and save her baby. At this point, it becomes about the people left behind and how they perceive the situation. It's a long story. It was awful. CPR on adults is bad. Enough, but on a tiny baby, there are no words to describe it. When the mom arrived, she just wailed. It's a horrific sound, a mother in torment. It just intensified once we said there was no more could be done. It was Sid's, so she just found him like that after his nap. Story 6. I stayed up till like 3 a.m. and just heard a super loud scream outside of my house. It wasn't just one time though. It happened a few times a week. Turns out it was a tipsy dude. Still scared the shoot out of me. Edit. Yeah, I know 3 a.m. the spooky time. Story 7. Girl getting her hip popped back into place in the ER with no meds after being thrown 100 feet off a motorcycle. I will remember the scream forever. It seriously haunts me. Answer. I heard something similar on a TV program. 12-year-old kid involved in a bike accident, just a normal pedal bike. With a car, they did the standard procedure, but they put him on some kind of substances like ketamine. It relieved his pain, but caused him to make this horrific scream. The narrator claimed it was just the substances and not pain, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was real pain, and they just used that to make people feel better. Story 8. The sound on its own wasn't actually scary. It was the fact that it came from the middle of my room, in the dark, and it sounded like a person making a popping sound with their lips. I was trying to convince myself that I imagined it. Then I tried to make the same sound to see if I could. I did. And then I heard it again. Like an answer. Yeah, 10-year-old me was scared shitless by that. I still have no idea what that was or where it came from. Edit. My most upvoted comment is about a popping sound in my room. Nice. On second thought, the sound might have sounded like it was created more in the back of the throat. It was a long time ago, and I really don't like to think about it too much. I have concluded that it might have been the floorboards or a hallucination, and that I should watch Hereditary. Answer. And it sounded like a person making a popping sound with their lips. Now I'm biased because I love being scared, and I love listening to scary stories and such at night, so it doesn't really bother me. But the sound of popping your lips together is very similar to hearing a nearby faucet dripping a drop of water once in a while. Hell, I was horrified one night because I heard some creepy jerk noise, and then I realized it was the ice maker. Story 9. Someone moving downstairs when I knew for a fact no one else should be home. X200B, ultimately more a sad story than a scary story. But when I was a teenager, my parents went to visit family out of town and let me do my thing at home for a few days. Unfortunately, my mom got a call that Grandpa had died, so they returned early and in the middle of the night. But instead of calling ahead or ringing the doorbell and just waking me up, they decided the best course of action would be to just let me have some sleep and then tell me in the morning. Needless to say, I was almost scared to passing when I got up in the morning and heard someone downstairs and the door opening and closing when I thought I was home alone. A week or two later, when it was raining and I see a wet spot forming around my vent hood over my stove, I call up a roofer to see what the heck the issue is. Apparently, some raccoons figured out how to unscrew the outside cover on the roof over the vent hood and had been climbing in to lick the grease off of the inside of the chute. Story 10. The sound of the passing rattle when my grandmother was on hospice in her final hours. It's a sound you're never prepared to hear, even when you know passing is coming for your loved one. Answer: hospice nurse here. Take comfort in knowing that the passing rattle is not painful or a struggle at all for your loved one. It is very disturbing for us to hear, but your loved one is not even aware of it. I'm sorry for all y'all's loss. I hope this will help ease any part of your grief that may have thought they were struggling or in pain due to the presence of the passing rattle. Story 11. One time at 3 a.m., my big dog let out a full-on wolf howl in a dark room. He was dreaming. I've never heard him howl before or since. It was a full volume. Roo, about a foot from my face while I was asleep. I seriously thought I was in mortal danger. Answer: I was walking my dog at about 4 a.m. a couple of years ago. I go to work before the crack of dawn and heard a coyote howl in my neighbor's backyard. Then another one answered it from the other side of the street. My dog literally stopped and shoot in the middle of the street, then turned and headed back to the house. I almost shoot too. Darn, that blew up. Thanks for the award. Story 12. The wet, thunking sound of my grandmother's head hitting the pavement when she fell off her walker, followed by low moaning and a pool of blood. She ended up being okay, but at the time, I thought I just watched her die in front of me. Answer: my grandmother did a very similar thing. I was maybe 10 years old and we were leaving the museum. My whole immediate family, my aunt and uncle, and my grandmother. She didn't have a walker, but she walked a little uneasy, refused to use a cane. She tripped on her own foot, went down on the pavement, hard. I remember it sounded like a watermelon hitting cement. She lived through the incident but suffered a TBI and was never the same again. She lived for at least 8 more years after that. Story 13. The National Weather Service announcements on TV radio. The aggressive beeps followed the muffled and staticky voice is horrifying. Answer: every part of the EAS is designed to get your attention and put you on edge. It's like that for a reason. If Bob Ross came on and announced that Yellowstone erupted and magma dildos were on a direct trajectory for your butthole, you may underestimate the gravity of the situation or even disregard the smooth, buttery narrative that will be your painful passing. Story 14. Way back in the 1980s when I was in the Navy, my ship was down at the Guantanamo Naval Base for training. One day we were out at sea doing underway replenishments alongside an aircraft carrier. During this exercise, the 2 ships would sail side by side on the same course, very close together, and rigs lines and hoses between the 2 ships to transfer fuel and other supplies. It's some dangerous shoot. Every time our 2 ships would come together and get lines passed to the other ship, a Russian trawler would come diddy-bopping along right between the 2 ships, forcing us due to an emergency. But this time, the 4 F-14s came roaring out of the clouds, one after another, afterburners fired up, and all 4 went supersonic just over the trawler. I am insufficiently eloquent to convey to you what it sounded like. The roar of the F-14's engines flying at maybe 80 FT and no more than 25. Yards away was like the gates of hell had opened up and every tortured soul howled in anguish at the same time. In the midst of this horrific screaming were 4 thunderous booms, one after the other. It sounded like the world was coming apart. It was mayhem. The guys on the carrier knew this was coming. The guys on our ship did not. People screamed and dove for cover. People pissed themselves. Some shat themselves. I nearly dove overboard looking for some cover from the god-awful noise. The trawler turned and disappeared over the horizon behind us at flank speed, and we never saw him again. Story 15. My friend was fatally shot in the chest when we were leaving a club together in 2016. We were tipsy and didn't really realize what happened, but when the reality of the situation set in, the look of fear in her eyes is an image I'll never be able to forget. She started frantically grabbing at her heart and crying, "I don't want to die," in between gurgled breaths. Moments before she passed, she started convulsing and making these primordial-sounding squelching noises that haunt me in my sleep to this day. She was 21. I miss her every day. Answer: I found my mother dead on my couch. I had to give her CPR, and I had to hear that passing rattle of the breath escaping every fudge breath I gave her. Ambulance didn't get there for 10 minutes. I still hear that rattling exhale. I still have nightmares. I can only imagine what you went through, fam, but I can sympathize a little bit. Some shoot sticks with you. I wish you peace. Story 16. My own face being beaten in by a home invasion robbery with the butt end of a gun. I woke up to being beat almost to passing. It was so loud in my head. Story 17. This alarm that comes on to warn of imminent attacks. It's only been drilled so far, but it's scary as hell. Story 18. My grandmother had an epileptic seizure, and in the 2 seconds leading up to her collapsing, she screamed. It was a scream that sounded like she just witnessed the most horrible thing in the world. I've forgotten exactly why she screamed, but a doctor said it was just like an involuntary reaction. Still scary as hell. Answer: the ictal cry. My husband had his first seizure 2 weeks after our son was born. 4 a.m. I was changing the baby in the light of a nightlight on our wipe warmer as to not wake my husband. Next thing I know, I hear him let out a haunting moan, thought it was a yawn, that got so loud I thought he was getting out of bed standing right behind me by the time the moan stopped. Literally, I said, "What the fudge," out loud while turning around and was kinda pissed, thinking he was messing with me. But I see him sitting up in bed and collapse right back down and proceed to moan loudly over and over. Again until finally the grand mal kicked in, and I realized what the actual fudge was happening and realized I needed to help him BC. No, it wasn't a joke or a heart attack, but a seizure. Really the most haunting sound. I couldn't sleep in bed due to the anxiety for about a month after that. Baby cam went on husband. Had nightmares. Woke up screaming his name. I think part of the anxiety had to do with me disliking the dark, despising loud, scary noise, and hating seeing my husband in such a state so unexpectedly. Sorry for the long post, it's something that sticks with me. Story 19. I live in a 150-year-old farmhouse, and I heard the most maniacal child's laugh in the middle of the night, approximately 2 a.m. I am 99% sure it was my 5-year-old daughter sleep-talking, but after hearing that and finding her sound asleep was unsettling. Story 20. I occasionally get auditory hallucinations when I'm falling asleep. Falling asleep last night, I heard what sounded like someone pounding on my door. Freaked me out, but our dog wasn't barking, which let me know it wasn't real. Answer, and here is what it's called: exploding head syndrome. Individuals with exploding head syndrome hear or experience loud imagined noises as they are falling asleep or waking up, have a strong, often frightened emotional reaction to the sound, and do not report significant pain. Around 10 of people also experience visual disturbances like perceiving visual static, lightning, or flashes of light. Some people may also experience heat, strange feelings in their torso, or a feeling of electrical tinglings that ascends to the head before the auditory hallucinations occur. With the heightened arousal, people experience distress, confusion, myoclonic jerks, tachycardia, sweating, and the sensation that feels as if they have stopped breathing and have to make a deliberate effort to breathe again. Story 21. An approaching earthquake. I was in the Seattle for both the Maury Island and Nisqually quakes, 1995, 2001 respectively. Both sounded like a distant freight train barreling down on us at top speed, just this deep, low growl that shifted into a roar coming through the ground. Mid-roar was when the shaking started. The Maury Island quake was short and shallow. The Nisqually quake, I was in the Soto district of Seattle, and I remember that after the worst of the shaking stopped, the ground was still moving like a liquid. That was uncanny, but that sound, it's like nothing else. Story 22. You ever had a poster fall off a wall in the pitch black in the middle of the night? It's like 5 heart attacks at once. Story 23. When my father held in place a stack of pallets, I don't know what they are called in English, but they are these wooden squares to place boxes or similar things on top. It must have been more than 45 pallets that were about to crush it. He used his arms and torso, managing to stop all that weight and putting it in place. I remember his cry of pain when he felt part of his stomach tear, leaving him with a hernia. Story 24. Was helping my dad fix an old water heater in a house he was looking to flip. As we were messing with pipes, we heard the sound of gas escaping, scrambled out of the house ASAP. Turns out the gas shut off the house used was faulty, and we hadn't properly shut it down. The moment we heard the noise was terrifying, though, since natural gas can blow so easily. Story 25. I live on the edge of a small rural town, so it's not uncommon to encounter animals here, but many of them are still too spooked to venture in from the wilds this far. One night, I was just watching some movie in the living room. The doors and windows were open, and I heard a woman scream. It was high-pitched, blood-curdling. I ran outside with my rifle, trying not to look as frightened as I was, and there I saw nothing. Just the tree line in the darkness. I looked around for a while and went back inside, starting to question whether or not I heard it at all. 5 minutes later, I hear it again. And run back outside. I forgot to grab my rifle this time, though, and was cursing myself as I approached the tree line again. But this time, I saw who made it. A goddamn owl. It looked at me, floofed up its feathers, and made the same sound. Owls typically don't want much to do with people, but on the rare occasional I've seen one in town, it's been the woo-hoo kind. This bad boy sounded like a poor woman getting necked by a slasher. I felt pretty relieved. Pretty dumb, too. Story 26. Lightning struck a tree behind my house. I was by a window on the side of the house facing it, and it sounded like a huge bomb went off. Knocked stuff off shelves and scared the hell out of the cats. I was shaking from adrenaline for a long while after that. Answer. I've had lightning strike really close to me. It was so fudge surreal. I know that what happened took about a nanosecond, but it was like time slowed way down. First I smelled ozone, then a noise that I can only describe as like a huge generator being turned on, like a big whoomp, followed by being blinded with the light and a crack of thunder louder than anything I had ever experienced. Still petrified of lightning to this day. Story 27. Once I was leaving my friend's house after a big barbecue party, backing up my car very slowly, keeping a close eye on all the children running around the yard. My husband, who had arrived in a different vehicle and so wasn't in the car with me, thought it would be funny to walk up beside window and slap the glass. I was looking over my shoulder at that moment and didn't see him coming. For one horrible second, I thought the noise of the slap was the sound of me running over a toddler. I slammed on the brake and started screaming before I realized what had happened. The terror was so strong that even though it only lasted a second, I couldn't stop crying for like 10 minutes. My husband felt real bad. Story 28. Scratching in my walls late at night and slight hissing sounds. I lived on my own and I was so scared. I recorded to show people I wasn't hallucinating. I would only hear it from about midnight to about 4 a.m. Called the landlord and found out some possums were nesting in that wall. Story 29. I was at the Belmont Ave L stop in Chicago waiting for my train to go to work. On the opposite platform, a very tipsy man, what used to be called a wino, fell onto the tracks. Several people on the platform reached out to him, trying to pull him back up. Every time the tipsy man tried to stand up, he fell right down again. The people on the platform couldn't reach him. My own train arrived and I boarded, then continued watching this drama unfold through my window. Suddenly, the commuters on the opposite platform started screaming, louder than I've ever heard anyone scream before. The sound was horrible. I could feel it in my chest and in my stomach. People were frantically pointing and I turned to see what they were pointing at. Just then, a train barreled into my field of view. The tipsy man hadn't been